Hello, I am Michael Nicks-Erickson and welcome to the Foodivist, a continuing series of videos dedicated to our food, who controls our food, what is in our food, and the laws surrounding our food. So this week and next week I'm going to present what I guess you could call a two-parter. So over the past few months I've noticed what I would consider an uptick across the globe as it relates to government regulations in our food. For the bulk of today's video, I will be focusing on the American lobster, and then next week we will dive into the latest craze of taxing or attempting to tax cow herds and the constant battle against climate change. Quick note on cows and climate. So years ago, I remember listening to the radio, and one of the DJs mentioned a little news blurb that disclosed that cows were behind global warming because of all the farts and the burps and whatnot. And I thought the story was ridiculous, and evidently so did the DJs, because they laughed and moved on quickly to some Ashlee Simpson song. But this past week, New Zealand became the latest country to propose taxing cow herds. If the governments of the world are looking for ways to make food production even harder and more complex than it is now, and more costly and more concentrated in the hands of a few, they found it. But that's in New Zealand. Why should we care? Because, my friends, we have a government agency exercising the same basic principles here in the United States. The National Marine Fisheries Service, a federal agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has been applying an increasing amount of pressure on the lobster industry. In addition to that, this past September, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program downgraded the American lobster to its red list. The designation advises consumers to avoid eating them as they're caught or farmed in ways that harm other marine life or the environment. According to the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program and the NMFS, lobster harvesting is negatively impacting the right whales. It is worth mentioning that the Maine Department of Marine Resources has reached out to Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, but according to the Department of Marine Resources, quote, Seafood Watch has ignored the information that DMR has provided on behalf of this industry, including that there has not been any right whale entanglements attributed to Maine lobster gear in 18 years and no deaths ever attributed to Maine lobster gear. Seafood Watch has also not considered recent conservation measures and acted within Maine's fishery. NBC 10 Boston asked Seafood Watch for a comment after the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, released a letter asking the NMFS slow its rule changes and to hold more listening sessions with members of the lobster community after only one virtual session. Seafood Watch responded by saying, quote, Seafood Watch stands by its science-based assessments and in reference to a federal court filing, confirms that we use the best available sources. Now, before you say I hate the whales, that's not the case. But let's talk about those resources. The Seafood Watch is referring to the data shared by the NMFS. The issue that I have with all of this is the fact that the NMFS established a 10-year whale plan in May 2021 that requires the lobster industry to reduce its risk to right whales by 98% by 2030. In November of 2021, NMFS again downgraded the right whale population and recalculated the potential biological removal to 0.7. Under Marine Mammal Protection Act, this means that right whale deaths from all human causes cannot exceed 3.5 whales every 5 years. The criticism of this policy is that the NMFS overestimates the risk the lobster industry poses to right whales because the agency is basing its decisions on worst-case assumptions and models that exaggerate risk rather than an objective assessment of the best available data, according to the Maine Lobstermen's Association, which is now suing the NMFS. The Lobstermen's Association goes on to say, quote, the NMFS also changed its accounting of dead right whales. Under its new method, for every observed right whale death, NMFS assumes that at least 3 additional right whales have died. NMFS refers to this as cryptic mortality. I can't say it now. NMFS also claims that no right whales die from natural causes and attributes 70% of unknown right whale deaths, those observed dead but no cause of death determined, and cryptic deaths, those assumed dead but never seen, to commercial fishing, and 30% to vessel strikes. After reviewing the responses from the Maine Department of Marine Resources and the Maine Lobstermen's Association, I did reach out to the National Marine Fisheries Services to ask their thoughts, made by the Maine Department of Marine Resources, that there has not been a right whale death entanglement attributed to Maine lobster gear in 18 years, and no deaths ever attributed to Maine lobster gear. I've shared their full response in the description box below this video, but I did want to pull specific points here. In response to there not having been a right whale entanglement attributed to Maine lobster gear in 18 years, NMFS said, quote, "Until Maine required lobster gear markings in September 2020, the majority of Maine gear was unmarked, making gear attribution difficult." They go on. "Given most right whale mortalities are unobserved, gear is rarely retrieved from observed right whales bearing entanglement-related severe injuries and mortalities. We cannot dismiss the likelihood that Maine buoy lines, which make up the majority of lines in waters where right whales occur, are responsible for some of the serious injuries and mortalities. In addition, entanglements in fishing gear is one of the greatest threats to North American right whales. Even if gear is shed or removed through disentanglement efforts, time spent entangled can severely stress a whale, weaken it, prevent it from feeding, and sap the energy it needs to swim, feed, and reproduce." So this all seems very logical, and in this case, maybe this regulation is justified. I'm right there with you in believing that an industry can and should continue to modernize to improve efficiency and to conserve the environment, but also that an increasing level of regulations are not always helpful. At what point does it, meaning regulations, pass the point of helping and move into the point of oppressing? In case of the American lobstermen, power over person's support is power over their will. That's from the Federalist. For me personally, I do believe that the institutions of our representative governments, as it relates to food policy specifically, have evolved in a way that was not originally intended and is less committed to the preservation of dignity or health and safety of its citizenry, and more about serving special interest or the industry with an eye towards the economics of a situation. And this goes beyond the National Marine Fisheries Services, just to confirm. Are more committed to politics and profit and continued control or expanding their control. At what point are they helping, and at what point are they intentionally making the food system so unnecessarily complicated that it requires a special class of people with unlimited resources to actively participate and produce in that system? As I said at the beginning of this video, we will dive into the taxation of cow herds next week, and I'm sure that after next week, the role of governments in our food supply and regulations in general will continue to be a feature of this channel in the future. So don't worry about that. I'm sure there's more of that coming. Until next week, I am Michael Nicks-Erickson, and thank you for watching.